The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. So,
Spoke too soon about the tech gremlins. All right, well, I'm going to continue and then I will fix that because I know it's picking up sound through the computer. Hello, my name is Heather Sandine and I'm serving as the technical host for tonight's meeting. Thank you for your patience and grace as we all adjust to hybrid platforms, and we're all learning, and we appreciate your understanding with any technical issues that may pop up today. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit that website. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking that button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. If you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Okay, and let's see if we can fix this audio. Test, test. Test, test. It's working. Except our screen is stuck. So.
Planning board landmarks for you, landmark clusters upstairs.
All right. You're ready to move on.
yeah, so the next item in the agenda, so there's no public participation?
No, there's no attendees.
Okay. So yeah, I'll give it to you for the mosquito program update.
All right.
If I can, if Chairman, if you don't mind, I just tee this up really quickly. For the record, Jonathan Cohen, Director of Climate Initiatives. I just wanted to maybe give a little context to the board on why we felt it was important to bring tonight's conversation to you for some feedback and some thoughts and just reactions. Joining tonight is our, what is your title now, Rella? Senior ecologist? I think that's right. So Rella, there it is. I got it right. Yay. Rella Abernathy, really excited for you all to meet Rella. If you haven't already, Rella is in our Department of Climate Initiatives. She moved over and joined us a little over a year ago, I believe now, a year and a half. I can't even recall. Time flies. But we've worked with Rella for many, many years on this particular program. Rella is going to go through some of the results and talk to the board tonight about our mosquito control program. But really what I hope the board takes from this conversation is really the approach that we have been taking for many, many years, how we've really continued to evolve our thinking around ecosystems management, the role that our mosquito control program actually plays within that. And one of the things, I'm not sure, I've not seen the presentation that you're going to see tonight, but one of the things that Rella has been doing over the past year or so is really helping reshape and rethink our integrated pest management or IPM program. So how we think about the use of chemicals, how we think about the use of pesticides overall on city properties and city lands. And so tonight, and I think you can see the title up there, is really reframing and thinking differently about what have we learned in this process and the way we think about our mosquito control program, which is really, I think, pretty cutting edge and has been for some time. And then what have we learned and where are we going to go? And that's really what we wanted to bring to the board tonight. Did I get that kind of right, Rella?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Great. So I'll just introduce the amazing Rella Abernathy and she'll take it from here.
All right, thank you. So I'm happy to be here with you tonight, and I'm going to take you through, for some of you, it might be a little bit of review, but not too much. I want to kind of dig right into what was a crazy mosquito year last year. So mosquitoes drink nectar, males and females, and they do it their entire lives. That's where they get their energy source. Only the female takes a blood meal only when she needs to have the protein and nutrients to make her eggs. So they often take a couple of blood meals, and if they do that, they can get a pathogen. And if they're a species that's capable of replicating and transmitting that pathogen and pass it on to another host. So there's just, people really don't think about how many species of mosquitoes there are. You know, they just think mosquitoes, they're bad, they bite. But like many other insects, there's tons of biodiversity. And I'm going to keep emphasizing how important diversity is in different species and ecosystems and the approach that we're using and understanding what we need to do. So similar to, we have, thinking about bees, we have about 4,000 species in the United States, but worldwide there are 4,000 mosquito species. Most of those don't carry disease. A lot of them don't bite humans. They can bite reptiles, birds, they can even like, there's some kind of like a mudskipper fish or something that can be a host. So they have host preferences. Some of them are very specific, and some of them can bite more hosts. And if that's the case, then it has more risk for passing a pathogen into other animals. So in the US, we have about 200 species. In Colorado, around 50, and we typically catch about 12 in our traps. So that's the amount. That's the diversity that we're looking at. But there's a whole lot of other aquatic flies that are out there. The chiromidids are really important flies. They're non-biting midges that are similar. They look like mosquitoes. People get them mixed up. They have a similar life cycle where they're often present with mosquitoes in habitats, and they are foundations of aquatic food chains, and so are mosquitoes. So we need to think about that when we're thinking about how we're going to control them. So you hear mosquito control people always talking about Culex here, because Culex is a genus of mosquitoes that can transmit West Nile virus. The rest of them we refer to as non-vector. A lot of those are what we call floodwater mosquitoes, which have a really weird life cycle. So you think of the typical mosquito as laying their eggs on water. That's what Culex mosquitoes do. They often have little rafts, and then they go through the whole life cycle in the water. They have to go through the life cycle. Once the eggs are laid, they'll die if it dries up or it's disrupted somehow. But the floodwater mosquitoes are the ones we see huge numbers of in the spring. And what they do is the females lay their eggs on dried mud. dried mud, mud that then dries out, and the mosquitoes have to dry almost like a spore. So eggs do. So the eggs dry out and they can build up in like a seed, like a wheat seed bank, and you end up with like you can have years accumulation of eggs sometimes, and then when it floods, that's why they're called floodwater. Then they hatch, and then they have to go through the whole life cycle again. But that's why we get these huge synchronous emergences of those types of mosquitoes. Now, these two can coexist in similar habitats, and you're not going to see floodwater mosquitoes laying eggs in a container in your yard as you are with Culex. But out in the environment, when something floods, the floodwater mosquitoes will hatch. And the Culex females will come and lay their eggs. So we often see them in similar sites. And that's fairly common. Now I'm going to jump right into the way that we gauge risk of West Nile virus. We use something called a vector index. And what they do is when we trap the adult mosquitoes, we look at they're keyed, and so they're identified down to species. And the Culex mosquitoes are taken and from what we call sentinel traps and sent for testing to see if they're infected with West Nile. And there's an arbitrary value that's the vector index, which is used to estimate when you have enough West Nile virus circulating in the mosquito population that the risk of transmission to people is likely. So when we see that happening, then we know that we're probably going to start. We're starting to amplify. You see it start going up, and then you know that you're probably going to start seeing human cases. Now, the threshold is 0.75. So this was last year. As you can see on the end where we are, City of Boulder, we hardly had any West Nile virus in our mosquito traps. But if you look at these other zones, this is Boulder County. Zone 1 is around in this part of the county where we are. Zone 2 is Longmont, and Zone 3 is Erie, Superior, that area. Now, this year, you can see that they normally don't have numbers that high, and some of the experts are really alarmed when they saw these numbers over 2, because it's really rare to see them that high. But this year we had really, really high mosquito numbers, and I'm sorry for this kind of lousy graph. I took it off our dashboard. But we track every week. We update our dashboard so we can track what's happening with mosquitoes, and council gets a report each week. And our dashboard compares the last couple of years just so we can see. And you can see we had some pretty high mosquito numbers. Now, these are all species of mosquitoes. A lot of these are the nuisance type mosquitoes, the non-vector. And every year it gets higher. So if I were to show you a few years, running, you would see it getting higher and higher. Mosquito numbers are increasing drastically all over the world, despite all these measures to try to manage them. But here's what I want you to see is that this is off the Colorado Department of Health and Environment's website where they track it. So they're only looking at the past 5 years, but you can see we had a big surge in human cases this year. That's still not anywhere nearly as high as it was when it first came here. We had the epidemic where we had hundreds of cases, and then it came down, and it's been staying down ever since. So this is a little bit of a blip in that. But here are the vector index numbers for this year. So this is from Boulder County's publication. So they actually have us in there on the end, the City of Boulder. And though we did have some, infected mosquitoes more than we usually do, you can see we never went past 0.75. And the times that we did have infected mosquitoes were fairly low. Now look at the other places. That is unprecedented. I don't know if we've ever seen vector index numbers like that. So it was like a real anomaly. So, I seen these numbers come in, and when you manage a mosquito program, you're always worried, like, what's going to happen if we start having really high cases? What can we do? Because most of the things that other jurisdictions are doing isn't working, and this is kind of obvious. So here's just looking at the percentage of Culex of the overall mosquito numbers just for us. These are just our traps in Boulder. And you can see we had, some fairly high percentages, But by the time we were having these higher percentages was later in the season. So the overall mosquito numbers are going down. So it's not quite as bad as it looks. This is fairly typical in lots of years. But what I did is I was kind of tracking what was going on in other areas, and this is around Longmont. Okay, so their contractor puts up on a map what the spray routes are and the trap numbers, and I went and got the trap numbers from these little markers that were over on the side, just to see what was going on. And I have never seen anything like this. So the number in parentheses is
Keep going.
the number in parentheses is culex, and then the top number is the total number of mosquitoes. So, and I know this is just like this top blue lines are ours out of our track numbers for that week out of our report. I just took a screenshot of it. So you can see we were between like 4 and I think it's covering up here. Let me see if I can scoot this out of the way. Okay, so we were between, 4 at the lowest, and our very highest trap was like 176. And that must have been a pretty high trap overall. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to move that. We had 1,357 culex in all of our traps. Now look at these. 1,380 in one trap, 2746, 1213. These are huge numbers, and these trap numbers are high, and this is after they've sprayed repeatedly every single week. And they just kept climbing and climbing, and people were incredibly worried, the public health folks. So why? Why are we seeing mosquito numbers go up?
I know, I remember.
And why did we have this huge increase in culex? And as I'm looking back on what we have done and what other jurisdictions are doing, I really think the evidence is growing all over the place, but particularly in mosquito management. There's such a difference in managing the ecosystem versus focusing on killing a pest. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. But one of them is that, when you're trying to kill something, first of all, they can become resistant to whatever method you're using. But it always has collateral impacts around to non-target organisms. And you can get resurgence of other pests sometimes. And in this type of management, we know that culex mosquitoes actually can avoid pesticides. They know how to avoid the insecticides that they're spraying, and they're becoming resistant. So when people are using what we call a pest-centric approach, they treat symptoms instead of managing the ecosystem and thinking what the underlying issue might be. And they think about the pest in isolation instead of how it fits into a food web. And then people keep using the same approach and get more and more reactive as it gets worse. So if you get more weeds, if you get more mosquitoes, you just spray more and more and more trying to kill them. And often that doesn't work at all. And that's what we're seeing happen here. So our integrated pest management policy, these aspects of it are unchanged from when it started, when it's really an ecosystem management approach. So we're looking at how we manage the overall biodiversity and ecosystem health. And usually what happens is you get organisms pretty much staying within fairly stable bounds if there's not too many interventions happening. So one of the, was I'm talking to you about what we're doing as opposed to some of the other, most other mosquito programs. I'll talk to you how that works as IPM. So it's really important that you map everything, where, you're going to have a potential pests be, so that you can keep track of what their density is, what their impacts are. So we have over 500 sites that are mapped for mosquitoes, and those are about 300 of them are checked every week and 200 monthly. And that all depends on 30 years now? No, about 20 years worth of data where we've been keeping track of how many mosquitoes are in all of these sites. We keep a running count all these years. So we have this historic data I don't think anyone else in the state is actually even counting the number of mosquitoes that they have, if they see one they treat. And another thing that's really different about us is the Culex mosquitoes, the ones that can transmit West Nile, just happen to have these long siphons on the end of their tails. They don't have gills, they can't breathe air in the water, so they have to come up to the surface to get air. And it's like a snorkel that they can stick up and get air. And you can tell, the skilled person can tell the difference between them and these other groups of mosquitoes. You either have a little short siphon, or some of them actually lie against the water and get air through their little spiracles. So they can tell the difference looking, because those siphons are so big on Culex. And the way that they monitor for them is they have these poles with cups on the end, and they go around dipping, and they know what type of habitat they'll be in. Then they look at it, and our people count. They count how many are Culex and how many are the other types of mosquitoes. And then the treatment for larvicides that's most often used is something called BTI. That's Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, which is a soil bacteria. It was discovered in soil, and it has crystals in it that are toxic proteins that once they ingest those, it tears up their digestive system. So they're supposed to be there's several BTs, and they're supposed to be specific for different groups of insects. There's one for leps and moths and butterflies. There's one for beetles. There's one for aquatic flies. But what we don't really understand is how much cross reactivity there is between them. And I found one study that shows that there is some. But the one thing we do know is that they take out aquatic flies in general. So those chiromidids, those little non-biting midges that are so important in the food chain, are impacted by them. And then we have studies showing that it goes up the food chain. So when you start impacting them, the flies, then you start impacting the algae that they feed on, or the organic matter they feed on. Changes the water chemistry. It changes the predators that feed on them, like dragonflies, and then that can impact bird populations. So long-term studies, we know that there are impacts. So just because something's a natural product doesn't mean it's not going to have serious impacts. You can't just use it because it's a natural product. And our team also goes out and does biodiversity surveys. So they're not just looking at the mosquitoes. One of the things our IPM program requires, or that should be being done by everyone, is you're looking at the non-target organisms to see what's happening with them, and as much information about that ecosystem as you can get. So when they do those kinds of dips with those aquatic nets, they put it into an enamel pan, and if you look at it, it's just, the more you look, the more you see. There's damselfly larvae and beetles and bugs and all kinds of critters in there. All different sizes, different species, and different ages. And then they also do terrestrial biodiversity surveys. So they're looking at fish and frogs and birds and insects. But then, something that's really important is, like, we're checking for amphibians, particularly leopard frogs and salamanders and other tadpoles, that are incredibly at risk right now. And one of the things BTI does is it totally disrupts the guts of tadpoles. And this is at field concentrations. So one thing we really try to do is avoid treating anywhere where there are amphibians. We try not to use it at all. And what we're finding is that when we have a lot of biodiversity, that the natural predators keep the mosquito numbers low. And so we have this pretty complicated threshold and decision-making process before we'll even consider treating it. And I think you saw that she, instead of using huge amounts, they're treating by hand, small amounts. And those are usually little, like depressions in places that are filled up with water that aren't part of a bigger wetland, where you haven't had a chance for predators to come in, and they're ephemeral or gone even before anything can happen there. And this is just, the levels and the different levels in these really complex aquatic and wetland ecosystems. And this is a brand new paper that just came out this year showing chiromidids dropping by 41% where BTI is used. So these are real impacts on ecosystems. But here's the typical way that other jurisdictions are treating. So you're going to think about them going through this life cycle from egg, going through the different larval stages, and then becoming a pupa and emerging as an adult. Fogging with insecticides. They're using not one, but two types of bacteria. One's called Bacillus sphaericus, an insect growth regulator that interferes with juvenile hormone, which they use that to stay in a juvenile stage until they become a pupa, and then another hormone's released and it interferes with that, so they can't become a pupa or an adult. And surface oils. Surface oils suffocate everything, not just mosquitoes. So anything small enough that comes up to get air is also impacted by that. And weekly fogging happened in many places this last summer. So here's what happens when you rely on natural controls, instead of having a chemical at every stage here or a pesticide. When you have a balanced ecosystem, you're going to have something preying on something else. And that's what we're finding is happening. But the big question, kind of the holy grail among disease ecologists that they argue about all the time is, does biodiversity really prevent disease transmission through these systems? And part of it is just thinking about it logically, that if you have more than one aquatic little larval fly competing with culex, if you have other mosquito species there, if you have chiromidids, competing for the same niche, that there's going to be fewer culex, to become infected once they emerge as adults. And there's quite a few studies now looking at different aspects of that. But that could be what we're seeing happen. They don't have the data yet from this last season. The other jurisdictions don't either. The reports haven't come through yet. But something's happening here where we're seeing, much less West Nile virus in our adult mosquitoes and other places. So our next steps are, getting our data back and analyzing what we have in the season, but also really digging in and going back through several years and looking to see, are we having more diversity in our larval sites? And the only data that I could see now from this year is whether a breeding site with mosquitoes had culex, or non-culex. That could be a different group, a whole group of different mosquito larvae, or both. And what I found is we had almost no sites that had culex only. And that may be why we had so fewer, many fewer adults, and also why we had less West Nile. And we will analyze our adult trap data to see if we're seeing more diversity in those mosquitoes. We can get some data from the reports that the other surrounding jurisdictions put up on their websites. But it'd be really great if we could all work together and compare data and try to figure out what's going on. And it's pretty complex to analyze the biodiversity data just because we have so much of it. So we'll need to get this year's data done and constantly checking the literature to see if there are any relevant studies that might be helpful in this. And then we have been consulting off and on with some of the disease ecology researchers. But we need to keep bringing this new data to them and talk to them, because we really are seeing pretty striking contrast right now. And then we need to be talking about it. People aren't aware that this is, that this is happening, and a lot of people are using these mosquito barrier treatments in their yards, where they're spraying insecticides every 2 weeks for the whole season, which is bad for terrestrial, terrestrial insects and their children, but also gets into our waterways. So we need to get people to think about inviting life and insects into their yard, and birds, instead of trying to kill mosquitoes, which isn't too effective. So that's what I have. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or if you have ideas about what types of things you think would be interesting for us to ask as we move forward and design our program for next year.
Thank you so much. I'll open the floor for any questions. I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Who collects the data? Are those volunteers or employees from the city in the
Yes.
videos, pictures? you showed?
We contract with an aquatic entomology firm.
Okay,
Okay, so all the other jurisdictions are using a pest control mosquito company. It's totally different way of looking at things. So yeah, with those, they're all young women, in fact. And they go out in the heat of summer, they're out every day of the week. And they're experts. Some of them, one of them was like, there's only 15 people in the country that are certified to identify some aquatic group, I think caddisflies or something. So they can identify the species, adult dragonflies are saying they see new records. They're finding New Zealand lead snail that we didn't know were there. They find new leopard frog populations and report that back to open space.
so
So it's pretty amazing.
what jurisdictions like do the collection, just Boulder or like? Because you said like the other ones use a pest control.
No,
group.
they use a company called VDCI for Vector Disease Control International. It's part of a big multinational conglomerate. It's actually called Rent to Kill, is the parent company.
So we're the only city collecting data?
Where other cities collect the adult mosquito, they have adult mosquito traps. Yeah, it's kind of like, really, not a very good marketing idea. The other cities have adult traps, and so they'll have the same data we have. VDCI also keys to species for mosquitoes.
What are these
Mosquitoes.
traps like? Is like a trap that captures mosquitoes and you release them again, or how do they work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I should have put a picture in. I was trying to not put too much stuff in. There are different kinds. The most common one is called a light trap. In fact, it's called a CDC light trap. So it has a light source, and then it also has carbon dioxide. So they have dry ice in it because they cue in on that when we breathe out carbon dioxide. They also cue on a bunch of other stuff, but that attracts like all mosquitoes. There's one called a gravid trap. We used to have those until a few years we stopped having them. And the Culex mosquitoes in particular, like really, lousy habitat. The more gross organic stuff's in it, the better they like it, which is why they're doing great. Nothing that really the other aquatic insects can't live in those kinds of environments, but mosquitoes do great. The more we degrade everything and trash it, the better they like it, those species anyway. So, so they just hang these traps in these different places, leave them up for a night, and then they come back the next day. And then they have a pile of mosquitoes that they take back, and they have to separate them all. And when they have huge numbers, like thousands, they have like a grid system where they put them in little piles, and then they key a certain group of them because they have to sample them. They can't possibly key like 15,000 of these little tiny mosquitoes. But yeah.
So then can you extrapolate the mosquito population from the number you trapped? Or-
That's what I mean. That's what we try to keep track of. We put them in places we know are fairly high mosquito population areas or high activity areas. We also put them in other areas just to track for West Nile. So we have some areas like closer in the middle of town where we normally don't see any mosquitoes, and we had some last year. It was such a high year. But you're never going to know exactly how many you have. But what the other jurisdictions do is they use them either to monitor for West Nile, or a lot treat, or they spray for the nuisance mosquitoes that don't carry disease. And so when they hit a threshold, usually like 100, 150 per trap, they spray. That's where they say it starts to be uncomfortable for people. And you saw some of those traps for like 4,000, so there were a lot of mosquitoes last year.
I'm not sure if you're looking at me. I'm visually impaired, so I can't.
Okay, yeah.
So a couple of questions, I guess. Do you have a separation of like, okay, these are popular places, and so then like you get 3,000 and somewhere in the middle of the city, you only have a few hundred. And then the other question was, when do you spray? Do you spray every week? Or do you wait until your numbers get up higher?
We don't spray at all. And so I certainly I didn't make that clear. We have never sprayed ever.
Okay, so what is it that the BTIs that you,
Oh, it's a bacteria that they found initially in soil, I think is where it was discovered. It's not in high quantities in wetlands, so you know that we're putting it there, and it can replicate because it's bacteria. So they put it on things like corn cob, you know, they get little granules that it's embedded in, and then they just spread that. And that's how that goes into wetland areas or wet areas with mosquitoes in it. So it's only for larvae. So sorry, I didn't make that clear. The other jurisdictions are the ones using adulticides for adults and BTI with no threshold. They see a mosquito, they treat a mosquito larva. And then they use surface oils for things like pupae. And growth regulators in some areas. I don't know how they make those decisions where to use those things, but
What does BTI do again?
when the bacteria has these inclusions that are like crystalline proteins. And so when the insect eats it, those proteins attack their gut. And that's,
Like an adult mosquito, not a larva.
no, it's a larval mosquito. Yeah, the adult mosquitoes only drink nectar or
Okay.
blood for the
Okay.
females when they take a blood meal. So it's only the larva that we use BTI. It's called a larvicide because it's kills larvae.
Okay.
so is that stuff spread every week, or is it when do you distribute the bacteria?
That's so we have about 550 sites that our contractors go to. And what they do is they visit the majority of them every single week. And they don't treat them unless they go through a really complicated threshold to make a decision whether to treat.
Okay.
So first they dip and they look how many are Culex, how many are not, because that's a big decision factor. They look how many there are, because we have like an average per dip. So they dip the site depending on the size, and then they average it. And once it starts getting like, like around 5 or 10 larvae per dip, then it's starting to get like pretty, you're going to get a pretty decent emergence if something doesn't slow it down. A lot of times the sites will just dry up before they can finish emerging. They can emerge fast. They go through the whole life cycle in about a week when it's really hot, a little over a week. But if there's what our team does is they're checking it for biodiversity anyway. So they're looking to see are there mosquito predators there, how many. So we'll have like an estimate of like, okay, there's like 5 or 6 species of predators there. There's dragonfly larvae, there's damselfly larvae, there's some beetles and bugs. They may not treat it all, even if it has high mosquito numbers, because they're, and then they'll come back and check it in a few days and see if the mosquito numbers are down, and they almost always go down. We don't treat very often, especially in these more permanent type wetlands. Where we typically find mosquitoes breeding or like get a depression from a wheel or something, and then that will fill up with water, or you'll get a little depression outside a wetland. And there's nothing there. Sometimes, some predators can find them fairly quick and get them before they can start chomping on them before they can emerge as adults. But they're so good. This team that we have, they're aquatic entomologists. That's what they do. They can pretty much gauge whether or not something is, whether it's going to be a problem or not. So we really are very judicious about using it at all. That's why she was out there with her hands, instead of taking a backpack, which they have, where they can spray it over wide areas. So we're trying not to use it, because even though it's a natural product, it still is having major impacts.
So then this year you had a large numbers. You mentioned that it's been increasing worldwide. And that's what you've been noticing here, is that the number of mosquitoes has been increasing over the last few years. In Boulder.
Yeah, and what's mosquitoes, I mean, the biology is so complicated about all of them, you know, people think, well, there's wetland here, you know, or something that has water in it, they think it's gonna be breeding mosquitoes. Most of them aren't, when they're out dipping, it's not, you know, they'll get 500 sites in a month, and maybe or it's gonna be way more than that. Let's say they're checking on average like 200 or 300 a week, right? Of those, they may treat like 8 or 10. So most of them aren't breeding, or they're not breeding at a level that we would consider treating them. But then different species, the adults can fly long distances. So some don't fly very far, maybe a mile or two, and some can fly 25 miles.
Wow.
And they're tiny, they're little tiny insects. So when it gets hot and dry, they'll die. So they during the day, they hide out. And it's different species like different places. Some like grass, some like trees. And they tend to like to go along creek or ditch corridors. If you've ever gone out to, you know, the South Boulder Creek trails in the middle of summer and go next to a South Boulder Creek, you will be just like mobbed. So, you know, they all have different behaviors, which makes it more complicated to try to manage them, and why it makes it hard to try to kill them. It's you know, people are seeing trying to do it, they're not being very successful.
Yeah. I had a problem with a mosquito inside my house. It lasted for weeks, and I was like, where is it getting? I finally put a screen over my swamp cooler and within a week or so.
Yeah, that's one of the things, you know, we tell people, like, check your screens, they can breed in your gutters, and if they're not clear.
So I have a question, kind of about maybe what your recommendations would be for these other communities that are obviously having much higher numbers than we are. So you talk about the BTI and how it doesn't seem like we have to use it all that much. It really comes down to the biodiversity. So would that be your recommendation for these other zones? That there should be explicit efforts in increasing biodiversity? I know that they don't necessarily have the data to make that claim, but if that would be your recommendation, do they have additional considerations they would have to make that would be different than like the biodiversity that we would have specifically here, given their different geographic locations?
You know, that's the question that I really struggled with, because when we were getting these kinds of numbers over the summer, there was no interest from anyone else. Like, what are you doing? Why is it different? In fact, we're always looked at as kind of like the outliers who are going to kill everybody because we're not spraying. You know, people take these, you know, when you're managing mosquito program and you start seeing indications that there's going to be human cases, it's scary because you're worried people are going to get sick, and you want to do everything you can to protect them. And that's what people are doing. You know, they're doing their best to try to protect them. And this is what CDC says to do. It's what CDPHE says to do. It's what the faculty say to do. It's a lot of these schools. They say spray, treat with BTI. The environmental organizations who don't want people spraying with adulticides in fogging tell people use BTI, not thinking about what impacts that will have on the ecosystem. So it would be great if we could have these really truly open discussions about, okay, what does the data show? What should we be doing? One reason I think, this is just my conjecture, why we had like terrible culex and mosquito problems last year, is because we had that terribly rainy year where there were tons of weeds, and all the other places were spraying like crazy for weeds. Well, I thought, I'm going to go search the literature and see if there's any indication that herbicides affect mosquitoes. And you know that they're going to affect the aquatic plants, right? And the algae. And they do, of course. But, you know, when you see a study, it's one species in one situation. You know, so you have to try to take from that and try to see what you think might be going on in a certain case. But in one study, it showed that herbicides actually helped mosquitoes, that improved their populations. And another one showed, I think this was with malaria, that they actually were more likely to become infected with it. So you have all these levels of dynamics when you're dealing with a pathogen on top of everything else. And so It's hard. People like,
So what?
no, I don't think they had the mechanism. And lots of things will affect whether they're capable of becoming infected with a pathogen, including West Nile. Because not all of them do, you know, first of all, it depends on how much they come into contact with it, but you know, it's all really complicated. All the different hosts develop resistance of certain types, like we have. That's one reason in a study that was done a few years ago. They looked at different states and the drivers for West Nile virus, and we were one of them of 10 states. And what they said for us, this is with climate experts and epidemiologists, a whole different group of people, that we're becoming immune to it. Because the way West Nile works is even if you do get it, 80% of people never know. So you have no symptoms, you're asymptomatic, and then you become immune. We're outside all the time in this part of the world, right? Everybody in Boulder is always outside. So a lot of us have already been exposed to it, and then we're immune. So and then drought's another driver, and people like, wouldn't you think when it's rainy you'd have more problems? Well, when it's droughty, you end up with the birds, or one of the main hosts, coming to the water sources, and the mosquitoes are there. And so you're more likely to have the different players who have to come in contact with each other to spread it and do that. So these things are really complicated. And you know, we're seeing people so concerned about invasive species, you know, that we're seeing more and more herbicide used everywhere all the time. And that can have major impacts on these wetland ecosystems.
Yeah, so in 2020, it was a really bad mosquito year for everybody, but the numbers we were looking at, we were doing much better than Longmont, right? In terms of numbers wise and percentage of Culex. Do you have the data to know? Because you all have been doing this the same way for the last, you said 20-ish years?
Well, we've changed our program quite a bit over the last few years.
Okay.
So we've always keyed the larvae, not keyed, but visually, I ID'd them from Culex and others, and only treated Culex initially. And then we got some pushback about treating some nuisance areas where this county said, well, spray less in the areas that are unincorporated if you treat more.
Right.
But then we changed the whole program a few years ago and really cut back on treating everything. And then started measuring biodiversity about 3 years ago. So we don't have like really long-term data sets, and this type of data, you need years of data, like 5 or 6 to start seeing real patterns.
Absolutely. And there's obviously not a pattern yet, but have we been sort of consistently doing like better in terms of numbers and percentages than surrounding areas? Do you have the sort of surrounding data to know that? Or
well, I used to get it from the county. I'm going to see if I can get it again. But what I found was we mirrored them. You know, like when we had really high years, they had high years.
Right.
It doesn't seem to matter what people do for the management. You know, we have bad years and we have better years.
okay.
Sorry, please go ahead. Okay, I just wanted to add a comment here that the thing needs a little bit of emphasis too, and it has to do with public perception. It's one of the things that I think Rella was starting to dig into, and she's been very, very kind. Having overseen this program for several years, I can say that I've never seen the kind of anger, the community anger. I am not joking, from any other issue than I have seen with mosquito management. And in part of it, I have to understand, it was really when West Nile was really prevalent, and it just kind of made its move across the country and in areas in the eastern part of the city where you had a lot of recreational users, softball players, for example, neighborhoods close to open space properties where they were wetlands. They were seeing large numbers of mosquitoes. And I think there is a perception that we're not controlling mosquitoes unless we're spraying. It's a visual thing that you're out there and actually actively killing mosquitoes. And I think it's something that we really pushed hard against and we really bumped into a lot from recreational users. And our own open space department is thinking about how do we actually treat in those areas. We did some pilots over the years. But I bring this up because I want the board to really understand that I've been really proud of the work that Rella and the program has done over years to really fight against kind of that urge to just spray everything. And part of the challenge that we run into is that Boulder County does spray. And so in those areas of interface where we're treating with BTI and they're spraying, you have kind of both happening. And what we don't totally know is the impact of the spraying. We anecdotally, I think we know how the spraying is affecting our own properties, our own open space, wetlands as an example, because it does make its way in. And so part of the challenge is how do you kind of manage public perception and address the concerns that people raise about health and safety, while simultaneously kind of wanting to move the other direction and really thinking about our ecosystems much more holistically, thinking about treatments under this guise of IPM that Rella was talking about. So I don't really have a question, except I just really want the board to understand that that's another dynamic that we wrestle with in this program.
So I have a follow-up question for that. Do people voice their concerns, however you want to call it, by calling on an individual basis? Do they kind of like have neighborhood community meetings? What did that look like?
Rella, you can speak to what they do now, but I would say all the above. There were many instances where I would go out to town halls in locations in the eastern part of the city. And I will just say that I was threatened more than once.
Wow.
Yeah, which I found
Things were pretty crazy, and
It's pretty crazy.
actually, Jonathan actually hired me when I started working for the city 14 years ago. He was the manager of the environmental affairs office, and he was stuck with the mosquito program until I got there. And you know, people were doing is they would use bug zappers, and they come in with like this big tub, and bug zappers catch almost no mosquitoes. They're horrible things. They catch all these poor moths and these wonderful insects that we need, and lots of totally innocent little guys. But yeah, there were some rabble rousers in one neighborhood, and that neighborhood did have terrible mosquitoes compared to the rest of the city. Now it's not so bad anymore. It's just so weird how the patterns just keep shifting. But yeah, those people who were more vocal don't live there anymore, and I don't get any angry complaints anymore. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. It's probably stinks myself.
I mean, it's the city council. They spend a lot of time going to city council, looking for policy change, saying, look, right next door, they're spraying, they're doing something, and you guys are like, throwing cereal in the water. You're not doing anything.
So what we're doing is working as well as spraying pesticides, or better or worse? Like, what's the conclusion here?
Well, in previous years, we seem to be doing about the same. That's where I would see it. This year, we were way better. Like, normally, and especially in the city of Longmont, they would have some areas that are just high mosquito activity. And in those areas, there's nothing you can do. I mean, if you wanted to like use a nuclear bomb and kill everything, that's alive, you probably still have some mosquitoes left, I would think. I'm exaggerating a lot of cockroaches and mosquitoes. No, but you just can't get rid of them. They keep flying in, and we have all these flood irrigated fields, all around the Front Range. There's no way to get rid of them. And some places are just high mosquito activity areas. And so I don't fault anybody for, having high mosquito numbers like that. But this year it was just consistent, many places. And I saw that in other places along the Front Range. It wasn't just in Boulder County that there were high vector index values. It was everywhere. So it was like a really, scary time, but still, we had that blip of human cases, and it was like 40 people died this year in the state, something like that.
48 or 50.
40 or 47 or something like that. And normally that's way higher than we've had in the for years. But compared to that first year when it came through, where we had a few hundred who died and thousands of cases, we're still doing better. And that's pretty amazing considering how much West Nile is circulating mosquitoes, because there were a lot of infected mosquitoes, except for us here where our traps are anyway. Yeah, so, yeah, the vector-borne diseases are some of the most emotional and scary things. And they're, it's not just the things that are transmitted by, fleas and mosquitoes and ticks and things. But it's the things like COVID, where we start getting biodiversity and ecosystems becoming disrupted. We start, having people go into places where they ordinarily wouldn't be, or animals come into other places, and then these diseases spread. And they call it the dilution effect, where you have enough biodiversity, it's harder for a pathogen to find its way, enough to amplify within a population, because you just have so many other critters around. But we're getting to the point now where, if we're not really cautious about making sure that we start really bolstering biodiversity, we're going to see more and more of these types of diseases. And spraying isn't the answer. One thing I wanted to tell you guys is there's a great study that looked at how many droplets of insecticide in the air you'd have to kill one mosquito. Because they use what they call micro droplets. So when they're spraying, they try to get the tiniest mist they can that will hang in the air. But the mosquito actually has to come into contact with it. And the odds of that happening is like one is at 0.0000, like 807% of those droplets actually make contact with the mosquito, and the rest of them go off everywhere else. So a lot of it's perception. I saw some studies where they sprayed with water, and people would report that the mosquito populations were better, just because it's,
Well, I think I saw something recently, like on Nextdoor, that was like some post about the city of Boulder is still spraying. I saw them, and I don't know, I didn't know if do we spray anything, and in the city,
not for mosquitoes.
not for mosquitoes. Yeah, that's like happy to hear that. Something like that. Yeah, maybe we should just go around spraying water.
Thank you, humidifier.
You mentioned at the top of the presentation that Culex mosquitoes specifically are able to avoid pest control methods and are able to sort of endure, that a lot of pest control is just not super effective against them in general. Do you know how much effect, because sort of the standard practice mosquito prevention is like 5 different things that target every single space of the environment that they live in. How much of that is just not affecting mosquitoes and increasing the chance of Nile virus by restricting the biodiversity? Do you know?
We don't know. I mean, that's really complicated. Like I saw one study that Culex would learn to avoid sprayed areas.
Right.
And they're great. The thing about these insects that can live in really bad conditions and can turn around populations really fast is they're really, really good at developing resistance. But things like dragonflies are really bad at developing resistance. These predator type insects, or things like pollinators, they suck at developing resistance. So they just die, and that's, part of the problem. Or they starve, because you can wipe out the mosquito larvae if you use enough stuff, but you also wipe out all the other flies too. And then you have nothing for anybody else to eat, who's out there depending on them.
Is there any things that we can do to promote like dragonfly populations or other predators of mosquitoes that, in an area with,
You mean taking and augmenting dragonfly populations and raising them up? People are trying that.
Okay.
The best thing we could do is just fix their habitat. They're really great indicators of environmental quality. And they are amazing insects. I don't know if you guys have ever seen video of the larvae eating, because they have this retractable jaw that just pops out with like teethy things on it, like these little toothy things, and then they pull it back, and then they can eat things way bigger than them. They can eat tadpoles and small fish and yeah, and they eat a lot of mosquitoes. I love mosquitoes. But they're, a lot of these aquatic insects are very susceptible to environmental change, so they're not doing well with climate change. They're not doing well with pesticides or fragmentation of habitat or poor quality habitat.
Well, that's what I was wondering, like, not just. Like, I was up in Gregory Canyon with my partner and we actually saw like 4 or 5 pairs of dragonflies that were mating or something, all right up there. And it's the first thing we'd ever seen anything like that. But, is there a way to help protect certain environments that would help?
Yeah, don't use pesticides, replant, with native plants and take care of soil. It's just the basics of like restoration efforts or conservation efforts. I usually show this video of one of our the field team, the field ecologist, where she's sloshing through in her boots in a wetland to go monitor. And she says, look at all the dragonflies, they're just flying everywhere. And she's like, aren't they beautiful? And I just love that, because they're killing themselves in the summer. It's so hot out there, doing all this work because they care so much about it. And they want other people to learn, from what we're doing. And then they're just delighted, like when they see like the insects and the birds everywhere, because then we know that we're doing the right thing. And so they're hoping other people will.
I mean, what about educating the city about like that sort of thing, like providing ecosystems? Like, here's a way that you could have in your backyard, like a little garden, and these are the kinds of things that you could plant, or here's the kind of environment that would help promote those species.
Well, Hannah learned how to do that. Take a pollinator advocate training, which is an amazing training from the city, and learn how to do that in your own backyard. I did it. It's awesome.
Okay.
I've also been getting similar styles of things since I was very young in school. I think is definitely something that is being more prevalent recently. Just like more so than my parents, more so than any other person 10, 15 years older than me. Like, there's just a much greater consistency in sort of that style of education around, bringing in people from outside of the school system to talk about ecology and biodiversity. That is definitely something that I think a more intrinsic understanding the younger you are from the schooling that is happening, at least around here. So I think there are some pretty serious strides. I think it'd be hard to educate the population more than they're being educated right now, at least in a way that they would be receptive to receiving.
People really care. What they need to know is that this is climate action. This is what it is. These living systems are critical, for life on Earth, and when they start breaking down, we need to be acting quickly. And we're in kind of a bubble here. It's unfortunate that more people around, at least this country, aren't doing more. But around the world, every other country has agreed. Every other UN member country has agreed to develop a national biodiversity strategy. And then the governments below them, the counties, provinces, cities, are all supposed to be following that. And they have really good targets, and they're solid. So we're having to do that on our own because we don't have one at the federal level. But Boulder is doing it. We're one of the cities doing it anyway. So, there's lots to hope for. And this year we did a little creatures art shed. I don't know if any of you went to the library and saw that. But we were trying to get people to think differently about insects. So that's all insects, even some that they may not like. And they were great. We had some great exhibits, including Heather's daughter had a sculpture there. So, those are the types of things we're doing to get people to understand just constantly how much diversity matters, in everything.
So is using pesticides is a lot cheaper? Or what's the motivation for other municipalities to just spray?
Well, first of all, it's advice they're getting from the experts at CDC and CDPHE and all those places. And just think about the way our brains work. If you see a problem, you want to fix it. If you see something that you think is, hurt, but has a potential to give you disease or your child or your aging parent, you're going to want to try to take it out. And that's the way our brains work. It makes sense to us, the way we think about things in the world, but it doesn't work in the complexity of natural systems. So part of it's just trying to do things the easy, efficient way and dominate. We like to try to dominate and use technology to solve everything. But a lot of it's a mass marketing, very effective strategy that's been going on for a very long time. So people think it's okay because they're told it is, and it's marketed to them. And that's a hard one. That's like it's in some ways it's as hard as the fossil fuel companies, but even harder, I think, because people think that they're managing problems like invasive species, and that if you don't use those tools, that you can't do it effectively. So yeah, there are whole areas of study looking at how what they call pro-pesticide behaviors, occur in governments and in society in general, and it's a thing. So it's real. And then also having things like concerns about pesticides being tied to things like being anti-vax or so there's also that type of strategy going on behind the scenes, so that when people do raise real issues with real evidence and science, or attacking the scientists who are doing this work, that's another thing.
So it's corporate propaganda is the long and short.
It's very effective. Yeah.
Did you guys publish your data like in journals?
Well, I think we're going to have to publish this. We're getting close now. We'll be publishing some of the other work that we're doing. Well, we have one publication in now for another. Remember the dog collar study that Michael asked about last year? He asked about where dogs had tags where they were passive pesticide collectors, so they go around and people walk their dogs and then they were analyzed. That paper is I think been submitted. But we did it again during pesticide season because that was done in November. So it picked up, but only picked up stuff like DET and legacy chemicals for the most part. But this year it was in June, and so it was during the peak of the pesticide season, and that will be published once get the data. The data is going to be analyzed next month or this month. And then we did a creek study this year too. So that's mainly focused on getting people to rethink using lawn chemicals and what impacts that those have. Yeah, there are quite a few papers published by city staff or with city staff on.
What do you publish? Like in journals?
We work with researchers and they have to deal with all that.
Okay.
The feedback process is currently reflecting on.
I don't think we're allowed to talk about another government's process.
I didn't understand. I didn't hear this.
I was just wondering if this will be a good time to mention that the county is seeking feedback on spraying at the moment.
Yeah, without being able to speak intelligently about what it is they're doing and having somebody from the county.
Any other questions, guys? Good. Good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for letting me in. ramble on about mosquitoes.
It was very interesting.
Well, I like to show the fun pictures of the tropical mosquitoes and stuff that are like crazy. There's some crazy ones. That they're all flashy looking and have mating dances. Like this one that's a bird paradise mosquito. Yeah, they're interesting animals and most of them don't bother us.
Well, thank you so much.
Mosquitoes, I learned are the way that, the, cocoa, the cacao bean or flower is fertilized. So if we get rid of all mosquitoes.
Okay, well, thank you again. Yeah, I can't remember another time recently that we had such a long discussion and where everybody was engaged, so
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. Thank you. All right, well, let's move on to the next item, which will be matters from the Environmental Advisory Board. And I'm gonna give an update on the regional collaboration letter. I got from Maria Rotunda from the Westminster EAB. So I replied to her email and then I set up an initial phone call just to kind of understand what she was envisioning. And actually, 1 second. So yeah, I think there were two avenues. First, actually, let me go back. She did contact a bunch of municipalities across the region. She only heard from a few. One, us was one of them. I think she heard from Denver, for example. So she's gonna try to do a second round and approach them again and see if they're interested. But what she discussed is she wants to kind of get the boards together and try to figure out a way to share knowledge. Like, hey, this board in the city is working on this. This board in the city is working on this. Maybe we should maybe we should work on that as well. Maybe we should work on what they're doing. That was one of the things she kind of had envisioned. Second will be maybe if there are projects that one board is in particular is working on, then another board is interested in working as well. Maybe do like a joint statement to the city saying, hey, like we believe this is a regional thing that can be implemented by your cities, and just write I guess a statement to the councils. That was about it. Like, those were the two things. I don't think she had a very specific idea of what this collaboration would look like. I think she was just kind of testing the water, see if there was interest. And yeah, that initial discussion was just okay, like, yeah, what ideas you have, and that's what came up. And I told her that we'll bring it, bring what we discussed to the board, to Jonathan, and then update her on what we thought. And I guess take it from there. I mean, it's just kind of baby steps at this point. I don't think there's any concrete agenda or anything like that. Honestly, I don't know what that collaboration will look like or what the agenda or goals will be. I didn't have any specific feedback there.
I still think it's a really good idea, kind of to the point we were discussing casually before, is that adding more voices and support and multiple boards supporting the issue, I think puts a little bit more foundation and strength into certain viewpoints or things we're trying to bring
We
forward.
have a whole region calling for action on one thing. If all of the environmental advisory boards are saying, hey, all the cities, we should do a thing about this. Maybe that.
That's what I thought is the most promising one. At the same time, I don't want it to be much overlap with the community for climate action. Although that's something lobbying the state, right? So it's a little different.
Yeah, I don't think that there's much risk of that, and we work really closely with Westminster on CC4CA, Colorado Communities for Climate Action. One of the things that I would say, Hernan, that might be a great opportunity And we've talked a little bit about this with Westminster and a lot of the Front Range community is the climate pollution reduction grant. And so this is part of the IRA, the 2020 IRA. There are two planning grants that were issued in Colorado. One is to the state to really deploy the actions and the strategies in the next round of the greenhouse gas reduction roadmap. And the other is being ministered by DRCOG, so Denver Regional Councils of Governments. We are not typically part of kind of the inner core of DRCOG. We are part of DRCOG's planning territory. And so I raise this because I think there's a great opportunity to align local jurisdictions around the actions that could be taken as part of this large planning grant. And so there is a lot of work going on right now being administered by DRCOG. We are part of that team. Westminster is there, other cities are there, kind of passively waiting to see what comes out of it. But ultimately, what's going to happen is we were awarded $1 million for the planning, and then we have a grant application due March 1st of 2024 that lays out a set of regional type strategies. So these are actual tactics. These are things that we could start thinking about. I think, to your point, what are the things that we should be doing collaboratively? What would that actually look like? Whether it's regional transportation initiatives, whether it's something in terms of land use, is it mass scale? I don't know what it is, but there are a lot of sessions that we're part of right now to kind of come together. And I think there's a great way to engage boards in that conversation too. So it's not just staff teams, but how are we thinking about a collective action that we could actually all kind of come together, put this in, and there's a significant amount of funds that are going to be flowing for this work in 2024. So I just wanted to tag that as another potential outcome that we can kind of think about, maybe this connection that you've made now with Westminster.
Okay. So what will be a good, an actionable next item to do here with about this collaboration? Like I could contact her back and say we're interested, but if there's any, will it be still, do we have an agenda about things to discuss or not yet? You think like?
I would say probably let her take the lead on it, but that's certainly up to you all. Sounds like she's got some work to do to build a little bit of critical mass and.
I'm gonna go, maybe if you write to them, Bert, again, and say like Boulder was interested, maybe they will be more amenable to participating.
Well, yeah, I was gonna, if we as, if, you know, you reach out here and if we as sort of the Boulder Reservoir could reach out in the same aspect to other environmental advisory boards to show that it's not just Westminster who wants to work together.
And I think just want to do that and say, you know, okay, these are the ones that I have heard back from and are interested in participating. So hopefully that kind of helps gather a bigger group. I did like the idea of like the joint statements or, you know, like pushing for some regional in terms of the boards. Yeah, I'll get the contact back and say that yeah, we're so interested and we'll see where it goes and if she can set up an agenda or something. Yeah. But I think what resonated the most was the getting more regional support, right? Yeah, I think that was my okay. Yeah. All right, so I'll do that. And all right, that's it. Unless you guys have any questions about it? Or?
We should have just a process question. So I really enjoy all the presentations, like I'm learning so much and stuff, but when, like, if we did have an issue we wanted to like work together on and push forward, like, how does that happen? Like, do we put it on our agenda? Like, hey, let's, I guess it's a process question.
Never done it before, to be honest with you.
Oh, okay.
This is something new, it's new territory. You think about the function of the board as an advisory group to city council. I think there's a really interesting thing about, you know, multiple boards and frankly, I don't know the makeup of the boards that are part of this kind of confab right now, if they're all similar in terms of how they sit, how they are administered, are they advisory to staff, are they advisory to council? And I don't know if that necessarily matters, but I think there's real power, and maybe this is kind of what you're getting at. There's real power in kind of the solidarity of a voice to say, here's what we need to be doing. So how do you wield that power? Is it that one jurisdiction is having one particular issue, so you call on your friends and you have kind of critical mass saying you need to move on this? Is it petitioning the state to do something different? Is it a funding opportunity? So I think it's yet to be determined. It could be all of those things. I just think it's a really cool idea to maybe breathe a little of power into the advisory boards in the Front Range that probably has not been explored previously.
And were you asking about this collaboration or just us?
I think both in general,
Or just
actually, like,
overall as well.
what if we just wanna take something in the city, like the transportation board is doing the parking thing, like. When do we talk about that as a board?
Well, what comes to mind is that Urban Heat Island, which we wrote in every memo since, that's why I asked you the memos too, like, we wrote in every memo to council since 2019, I think, and then that eventually turned to Cool Boulder. But that was kind of like a unique thing I've seen in my 3 years as a member, so I don't, do you have any feedback on
Well, I
that?
just want to make sure I understand the question.
So
if you
there
could
was
just
something
ask
we
it
were like, we really wanna push the city on 24/7 renewables, just that's an example.
Sure.
Like, when would we, as a group, talk about things we care about? And then present them to you or staff or whoever.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I know I sound like a broken record in terms of who you advise, but it's not just that you advise council. Obviously, staff, we listen to what you have to say, no question, and it's why we bring a lot of the kind of staff level things to you, because we want you to know about them. We're not ready to have you like take a position on what Rella presented, right? But we want to start building your literacy on these issues. That way, when we do, you have some of that level set. The way I would normally answer the question is the board has an opportunity once a year to write a letter, and that letter goes to city council and says, hey, council, here are our priorities that we believe you as the policymakers for the city need to be focused on this year. I will say that that's pretty high level. Council looks at letters from all of their boards, and I don't think that it's that they don't care about your input at all. It's rather, how does this fit in across the spectrum of the advice we're getting from all of our groups? Now, one thing I kind of wanted to maybe bring up now, next week, there are going to be two topics that are discussed, that city council is discussing. One is the energy code. The other is the report out on the survey and work that consultants been doing on boards and commissions, an evaluation of our existing boards and commission structure. And I think part of what they're getting at is how do boards do exactly what you're describing? If you want to weigh in on something that's happening in transportation, for example, that kind of sits under the purview of TAB, but clearly you have a strong interest in it. Where does that show up? How does that happen? Well, what we've been trying to do, I'll be honest with you, and this is a little bit new territory, and that's why I go through the agenda to say, let's do a forecast, see the things that are coming to city council. I still don't think that that's hitting it, because frankly, those are things that are already scheduled. I think we're not far enough out to identify what are the critical things that are going to be coming in 2024. So let's make sure staff, well before they're like in that this crunch zone of like a month, writing a memo, trying to get it out the door and do a presentation for council, that they are really coming and doing the circuit with boards to take meaningful input. So one of the ways that is going to happen, this is going to be a trial. It's going to be something a little different in 2024. We've actually started work planning as a city. So all of the departments are laying out what are the key work plan items that we know are going to be going to council this year. And identifying boards and commissions input. So really starting to say, what are the big transformative things? What are the big things that council is going to be talking about? And to say, wow, we really need to make sure that we're going to this one, these two, these 17 boards and commissions. I have the opportunity to look at that and say, you missed the EAB. You got to make sure that the EAB is on there too. I feel that that's going to go a long way, frankly. It's a little bit of that setting up the process early.